Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Center podcast. I'm Amelia Zhivatovskaya, your host and founder of the Flourishing Center. We are training the change agents of the world and equipping them with research-based tools for healthy, happy, and successful living. And we're so grateful that you're here.
This is Real-Time Resilience, where we connect with real people being resilient in real time. Get ready to discover and learn the skills they use to overcome tough times and how you can use that knowledge to help you bounce back better.
Thanks for listening, and let's dive in. Hello, everybody. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. Shauna Strike is a rehabilitation consultant from Winnipeg, Manitoba. She is a graduate of our Certificate in Applied Positive Psychology program, and I'm so excited to have her with us for this Real-Time Resilience episode. As you know, our goal with our Real-Time Resilience episodes is to share real stories of real people being really resilient in real time. And I'm excited for you to hear Shauna's story and how she put positive psychology into practice. Something you might not know about Shauna if you just met her off the streets is that she's going to be taking hip hop classes this fall. And I'm excited to hear how the journey that she's been on has brought her to a connection to her body in a way that warrants some hip hop dance. So I can't wait to hear all about that. And I can't wait for you guys to be inspired and empowered by her journey. Shauna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amelia, for having me.
So let's start with what brought you to positive psychology in the first place? You and I met at a conference. It was like love at first sight. Well, maybe not that. Maybe it was that for me, not for you.
For me as well.
So what brought you? But you already had been on a journey to positive psychology before that. So where did that begin?
Well, actually, I was just finishing a chapter of my life. I had just sold my previous business, which was a rehabilitation company that helped people recover from injury and illness by designing programs for them. But I had had two babies, and I wasn't able to maintain that. So I had decided I was going to move on to something different, but I wanted to move on in a way that was different than anything I'd ever done before. And so I was actually having ankle reconstruction surgery and was going to be flat on my back for 4 weeks, which for a person like me who's always moving seemed like an insurmountable task. But as I was doing that, as I was recovering, I stumbled across positive psychology. I had no idea what it was. So I emailed the Canadian Positive Psychology Association and had an email conversation trying to figure out what this was. It sounded wonderful. How do you use it? Are you a positive psychology? I just didn't understand how it worked. And so I was talking with Lisa Sansom, and she suggested that I come to the Positive Psychology Conference. And so I talked to my husband about it. It was ridiculous because I was only going to have been weight bearing for a few weeks by the time that happened. And so, but I felt the calling to come. And so I did, and I hobbled through Ottawa, through this massive hotel where the conference was being held, and went through the first couple of days of the seminars and the workshops. And I was going to go to a different workshop, and the room had been moved, and I couldn't find it. And there was Amelia's workshop, and it's like I could feel the glow coming from the classroom area where you were teaching it. And I wandered in, and it was just like instant angels singing, like I had found home. And so I sat and listened to you for an hour. And it was the most incredible hour I had ever encountered. All the topics you said you covered in this program. It was everything I had been thinking about. But the program was in New York. I mean, I'm a girl. I grew up in small town Manitoba. I didn't even grow up in Winnipeg. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. And everything aligned. I ended up finding a friend who had a friend who had a apartment in Midtown. And so I signed up and just followed the path and enjoyed every second of the 7 months I spent with the other capsters and learning the material that you had put together. It was part of my life that I'll never forget for sure.
That's beautiful, Shauna. And I savored every single opportunity to be in your presence as well. And so you went home to Manitoba and you're just buzzing along. You've got your career taking on new heights as you're integrating positive psychology. And then life took you on a little turn. Tell us about that.
So I was and have always struggled with uh, taking on as much as I possibly can and still maintaining breath. It's literally how I lived my life. And so my company, I started a new company called the Possibility Center based on the material I learned through CAP, working with individuals who were struggling with recovering from injury and illness. So I was getting the cases where people had been stuck for a year, for 2 years. And I was also doing some other work with other companies, helping them work with people who are injured and ill. And then for some reason, I decided I was going to take my master's degree in counseling psychology. I thought that it was all coming together. And in February of 2017, I believe the universe had other plans for me. And so I ended up getting the flu, which I thought I had recovered from. But it was, I used to be a competitive curler, and so I was at the curling rink with my friends and curling, and my body just did not feel right, and I ended up leaving early. And every day that went by, I kept getting worse and worse and worse until finally I decided I was losing motor control. I couldn't speak anymore, and so I said to my husband, "I think it's time to go to the hospital." And I had done everything possible to avoid that. We went to the hospital, and that morning I said goodbye to my kids and kissed them, and I figured I was going to the hospital, get some antibiotics, and I would be home to see them. But when I got to the hospital, I was so sick that they ended up taking me to the ER and admitting me. And after they ran all the tests, it was decided that I needed to be admitted to the ICU unit. Now, I didn't know how sick I was at the time. They told me I had pneumonia. But what I didn't understand is that my body was going into septic shock.
Mm.
And I'm not sure, for people who aren't familiar with you, that's when the infection is no longer just in your lungs, but it enters your blood. And when it enters your blood, it enters all of your organs, because that's how the body works. The blood circulates, and so every part of your body is affected. So I was struggling with my breathing at that time because I had left it so long. So the only option that I had at that point to get oxygen into my lung was to be intubated or to be sedated, and then they put a tube down my throat. It was my understanding at the time that it was going to be for a short period of time while they got my oxygen levels back up. But as the infection ran through my body, it turned out that I was in a coma for 17 days.
Wow.
And so when I woke up, I had no idea what had happened. I thought I had just been asleep. I remember being put asleep, but I had no idea that almost 3 weeks had passed. And when
Wow.
3 weeks passes and you do not move your body, and your body goes through the barrage of tests, and I was taken to the brink of death, you wake up and you are a completely different person. Your mind is the same. Well, it begins to become, you get back to that as you figure out
Mm-hmm.
your orientation and all, but your body is in a completely different state. It has atrophied to the point that you cannot lift your head, you cannot feed yourself, you cannot take a drink of water. I could not speak. I could not swallow. After 20 years of working with people in a rehabilitation process, so began my own rehabilitation process.
Oh my goodness, Shauna. I have I have chills in my body. I've like tears in my jaw. I can't even begin to imagine what that was like to wake up and then just know that you're awake little by little, but like not be able to use your body after being so embodied for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And and also then what your family went through. I know that my mother, when she was going through her healing journey and crises, there was a period of time where she was in a coma, and her waking up out of that coma because the meds were still like very much impacting her. I remember she was paranoid, and it was like she was there, but she wasn't. And so I can only imagine the impact on your children to have gotten so close to losing their mother. And thank God you're here with us now, your partner. And then how long did it take for you to recover and be able to walk and take care of yourself?
Well, it's an ongoing process, to be honest. In terms of some of the major things, walking started probably about 4 weeks when I was really able to move, because I woke up and then I was in the hospital for another 10 days or so, which I begged them to let me home. Because of my background, I had an OT in place, a physio in place. I was able to leave the hospital, thankfully, because I wanted to get home to my kids. My husband chose to not bring my children to the hospital to see me in the coma. I had so many wires, and I had 7 IVs. I ballooned up to 40 pounds of liquid, if you can imagine, in my body.
Oh my gosh.
I was unrecognizable. And then by the time I woke up, I had actually lost 20 pounds. So I was so frail. My kids, when they did come to see me, did not, because of the tube in my throat, I couldn't speak. So they couldn't even recognize my voice. They couldn't recognize what I looked like. I remember my oldest, couldn't even approach me. It's like she didn't know who I was. And what was interesting for me, though, was I had so little energy. I was so tired and fatigued, and this illness had just taken everything out of me. I didn't even have the capacity to feel, if you can imagine. I didn't realize that not only does it take energy to move your body, it takes energy to have emotion. And the body, it's incredible how we preserve to live, is that I had no emotion. And so I was almost unreactive, if you can imagine, to my children being terrified of me. But I mean, those kind of things, I would say that took maybe a month or two to begin to feel everything. And then, whoa, was that a massive, I don't even know what the word is to describe what it felt like when the emotion began to come back. And I would see little messages from my kids. My oldest daughter, she would have been 7 at the time. She just turned 7, actually, I woke up just in time for her birthday. I found little messages on her backboard. I love you, Mom. I miss you, Mom. She didn't speak much through it, but she was writing things. My little one, my 5-year-old at the time, she just turned 5, was much more verbal with her process. And so, there was that emotional component that had to come back. And then the physical, I practiced. I was very aware from my work, as well as what I learned in the Vitality unit, is the importance of moving our body as little as your body will allow you, whether that's moving your fingers or your toes or your arm, that I needed to do that. And there was a lady in the bed, I shared the room when I came out of ICU, that was refusing to do that. And I had I felt horrible for her, and I certainly understood why it was so painful to do. But I was so grateful for the training that I had to know that even the smallest bit of movement, as painful as it was going to help me 6 months, a year down the road. And so that's how I began. I began with a hand movement, and I began with learning how to grip my drink, learning how to use a fork again, and learning how to, if you can imagine, I would start with a fork, and I didn't even have proprioception to know that I had hit my mouth. And so I wore a bib for the longest time as I learned to eat and get the proprioception back to know when the
Wow.
fork was in my mouth. And it just slowly, that came back. Muscle memory is a wonderful thing. And so within, a week or so, I didn't have the energy to feed myself an entire meal, but I certainly could make the fork hit my mouth, and I could make the cup pour into my mouth. So just very slowly. And then, the walking part started. And I remember thinking it was probably about 6 weeks before I was able to go out of my house and try to walk. It would probably been about a 10-foot walk.
Wow.
I remember watching people walk down the road going, wow, that's incredible. Look at that. Look at them walk. And I would make it to the grass and then back into the house. But very slowly, you take one more step every day, and then you're walking to the end of the driveway, and then you're walking to the next house over. And it was, that process took months, but very slowly things began to come back. And I learned, I was a competitive athlete. This was very difficult to imagine that my body couldn't do what it had done before, and that I've had injuries before, but this was another level. So I had to be, when you talk about positive psychology, the idea of optimism and what we learn with the ABCDEF, that was invaluable to me, because the thoughts of I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never going to walk down the driveway. And I had to turn those thoughts around. They weren't, it's understandable that you have those thoughts, and it certainly gave me insight into the people that I had worked with. What a gift to from the other side.
Let me pause you there just for a second, because some of our listeners may not be familiar with that technique that you just mentioned, and I think it's so crucial, right? It's so fundamental to what we're talking about here. So in cognitive psychology, we have a model called the ABCDE model, and the idea is that many people think that the way that the world works is that something happens and it causes a reaction within us. And what we know is that that's not true. It's something happens, it usually leads to a thought that we have or a belief that we're having, which then causes our reaction. So the A stands for an activating event or an adversity. The B stands for our beliefs or our thought process about the adversity. The C stands for the consequence, and the consequence could be the feeling that we're having or the behavior that we want to take on. And so in Shauna's case, this activating event, right, I can't get up, I can't move my body, can lead to the thought, I'm never going to be able to move my body. This is never going to change. And that would lead to a feeling like despair. And her ability to catch that thought, which we would require mindfulness and some training, because many of us don't even realize we have mind chatter. But once you can catch it, you can go on to the D, which is disputation, meaning she can talk back to that thought and say, okay, that's not true. It's not true that I'm always going to be like this. I know that things will change. I am seeing some progress. Things are getting better a little bit every day. Then the E is the evaluation. How does that new thought feel? And then in positive psychology, we also add in a F and a G. F stands for fixed mindseted action, and G stands for growth mindseted action. Where we're in a fixed mindseted place, we have this belief that either some people have it and other people don't. It's very black and white thinking. Either you have it or you don't. Growth mindseted action is asking, how can I learn? How can I grow? And so how can I use what I'm experiencing in order to move forward? And so I celebrate that you were able to catch those thoughts and sometimes let them just be, right? Because sometimes we want to throw ourselves a pity party. We need to grieve. There is so much loss. You're in such a better place, but no matter what, like even in those moments, if you were doing the best that you can, there's still even the grief of 3 weeks of life loss. There's going to
Right.
be so much grief. And even when we know this is happening for a reason, this is in my best interest, I'm going to somehow use this in the moment. Sometimes what's more appropriate is just to feel and just to feel it.
Exactly, which is a very important part of positive psychology that people who don't understand it don't think that that's part of the process, right? Allowing whatever is arising to arise. You don't automatically just move into positive, right?
Yeah.
And people misinterpret positive psychology that way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I know there were other things that you turned to. I would imagine gratitude, visualization. What else? What else were the skills that you feel supported you in this time?
Well, forgiveness was a big one too,
Mm,
right? Because I had so much guilt about leaving my kids.
right.
And I, in my mind, um, see, little things happen. So I remember when the physiotherapist tried to get me up, and I was so excited, right? Okay, I get to sit up. This is so exciting. And I figured, you have no idea about muscle atrophy. And I sat up, and it was horrible. It was just the dizziness, and it was so disorientating, and all the muscles just going into spasm, trying to support the simple action of sitting. And so, but I was determined to practice that. And so every time she came in the room, we would start with the sitting up. And after a week or so, I started to get better at it. And so the one time she came in and she goes, okay, let's see if you can do it. And I just quickly sprang into action, and I sat up, and I was like, okay, look what I did, right? And she said to me, okay, I suspect that what you just did there is exactly how you got here in the first place. And it was just like a light bulb of moments going on, right? This having to move all the time, having to do all the time, wanting to do things quickly. And I had this sense, and it was never her intention, but not only did I have the guilt of my kids, but I had the guilt of that the choices that I was making in my life prior to this is how I ended up in this coma in the first place. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was like so many aspects to my recovery, as you can imagine, as I've described. But this forgiveness piece was huge for me.
Mm.
Forgiving myself for my kids, leaving my kids, forgiving myself for, I'm a driver and a striver. And that did me, seeing the beauty of that and how it has taken me. It took me to New York, right? Who does that from small town Manitoba, right? There was many
Hopefully more
benefits.
people. Hopefully more people after
Yes,
hearing
hopefully
this.
more people. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, people looked at me like I was insane, and so that skill has served me. But I also had to look at, the part of it that wasn't always helpful. And when I got stuck in the guilt part of it, and so that forgiveness piece was massive. And then, of course, the overthinking. When we talk about overthinking and social comparison, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I not better? I'm sure there's people who've been through this that got better faster than me. Why is it taking so long? All of that, which takes you into that again. That takes you into that mind chatter and talking back to your thoughts. But there was it was just a constant. To be honest, the whole thing. I'm trying to think of a positive psychology concept that I didn't use. Savoring life.
Mm.
I remember standing, looking out the window, watching my daughter walk down the driveway and over to our neighbors by herself, and thinking how lucky I was there to watch her get to that moment that she felt courageous enough to do that by herself. It just immediately filled me with this joy and this gratitude of how lucky I am to still be here to watch her do that. Like, it just makes me teary to think about it. It's those little things that, all the big goals that I was striving for, I didn't realize it was those little moments that I would savor the most.
Wow. Wow, Shauna. I mean, this so much of this story is, and your experience is so touching. And I know that we talked and kind of developed a little theory together about it, which was that your previous experience leading up to this, having had been a rehabilitation consultant and doing the work that you did, enabled you to have the knowledge and the awareness of what was needed of your body and what was possible. And we were kind of, I referred to it as the three A's of having both awareness and access and ability, and how those three things, because of your background, helped you rehabilitate. Like, you became your own patient, which is just wild. And now you said it enables you, one, to have a deeper level of empathy and connect. And you're already so empathic and connected to your clients, but I would imagine even more so. And I would imagine that it's also driving a new sense of purpose and desire. And I'm curious what you see as the shift and what's on the horizon for you here.
Well, I think the thing that I understand more than ever is that we can never really understand what a person has been through. We can listen and we can try, but no two humans have had the same experience. No two coma patients, no two cancer patients, no two people who have lost their mother at earlier than they expected. We have to allow the person to inform us of what their experience is, and trust in that process. And this comes back to the coaching stuff that we did, and I took your coaching course as well. Their lens, my lens, is different than your lens, and we have to allow that lens to create the picture for us. And it's so easy for us to say, okay, oh, I understand that, or I've been there, right? But allowing the person their voice and then helping them find their answers, their healing. Healing is a personal journey. It's different for all of us. And the world, we're not treated that way. The medical system is starting to get there. The really cutting edge medical people are starting to see that medical treatment is personal. But when I work with people now, I'm very aware of what everybody needs is different. And so I really use that to inform how I work with people now. And I don't think I felt like I had empathy, but I always felt like, from working with so many different people, that I might have the answer. And now I just understand that I have different ideas, different tools that I can give to people, but they have to try them themselves and discover their own path of recovery. So that is probably the number one thing that I've come to. And the other part is I've really been inspired to kind of give back I'm part of Patient Advisory Council with one of the local hospitals. I'm working with them to really try to understand the patient experience better, so that when we discharge them, we give them information. When I left the hospital, I had nothing. Nobody talked to me about anything. And all I can think about is, you're right, the 3 A's came in. If I didn't have the background and the financial means and the awareness to do, I can't imagine that I would be sitting here with you today. It was just so impactful and so difficult. I don't know that people who don't have that, how they get through it. And so my work now moving forward is, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but I feel like the people who come across my path are the people that I need to pay attention to. And so I do that. But I also I'm trying to work with the system here in Manitoba about how do we do better for patients when we discharge them. And so one of the things I'm trying to gather some research on is what do coma patients, what has been their experience? And so I encourage your listeners, if they know of people who have been in a coma and had an experience that sounds anything like mine, to please get in contact with me through my website, thepossibilitycenter.com. and share their experience. I'm trying to gather this information. I shouldn't say there's nothing. There's very little information about this out there. And if we can together as a group just put some information together for people who can't afford maybe to pay for somebody, but could access a website or could access some information that could give them any bit of help. I would have loved that as I went through this last 2.5 years of my process.
Wow, Shauna, thank you so, so, so much for sharing your wisdom, your grace, your resilience, your optimism, and your beautiful light with us. I know that I'm taking so much from our conversation. And just to share with you, I can feel some healing to my own inner wounding as you shared your story. Because as I said, my mother's 10-year long journey with ovarian cancer that I stood by her side for, hearing you say that when you came out of the hospital, because your body was just trying so hard to survive, how there is a numbness to your emotions, and it makes that just made so much sense. And I'm so grateful because I can feel how it healed and helped this little young Amelia who didn't really think anything of it. Like I wouldn't have thought to say, oh, I wish my mom was smiling more.
Mm.
Or I wouldn't have thought to think like, oh, I wish, like, where's my grateful, loving, caring mother? She got back there pretty quickly, but I realized that was actually part of what just makes the whole thing so difficult as a caretaker in those situations where it's like, it is so gray. It's like the grayest times of my life. And thank God I had this rainbow colored life outside of the experience where I was supported and I could kind of go in and out. But it makes so much sense why it was so gray and it was so heavy and it was so bland, is because here she was, her body was using all of its resources to
Yep.
mend and to heal. So thank you so much. My heart just feels like, just understanding that just feels very, very healing.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
And so, as we've said, you've told people how to contact you, and we have so much richness in your story. And one of the ways that we like to end our programs here is I invite people to share what self-care practices nurture and nourish them. And as you know, our motto is self-care is healthcare. And so now, as your body is still perhaps on the mend, your mind, body, spirit, right? We're always still moving, still growing, still healing. But what are some of the ways in which you practice self-care that you'd like to share?
The most important for a person like me who is always moving and doing, for me, it is in the silence. It's in taking the moments or starting the day with just being aware and going inside. How am I feeling today? What's on my mind? Just checking in with that inner world, because that's the world that I was missing, that my body was screaming at me, and I wasn't stopping to talk with her. And so I'm very aware now that I need to do that. That is how my healing will continue, is by checking in regularly every day. How are you doing? And taking some deep breaths and connecting with my body. That is the number one self-care. And then the other thing is also remembering it's a gratitude piece. It's very easy, and I still have moments where my body is not doing what I want it to do, and just remembering all that it can do, all the ground that I've made, and all the progress, I guess, that I have made, and remembering the people that weren't as lucky as I. There is no reason why I should be alive today. And remembering that it just brings everything back into perspective.
Mm. Thank you so much, Shauna, and thank you for being you.
Thank you, Amelia. thank you for this wonderful gift of this course, and I am forever grateful.
This real-time resilience episode is brought to you by the Bounce Back Better, or B Cubed, resilience program, where we teach people the 16 basic building blocks of bouncing back better to whatever obstacles come your way. Check out our online self-study courses, and for our positive psychology practitioners, learn more about how you can become a resilience trainer yourself. Visit bouncebackbetter.com for details.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I want to encourage you to tell us, what would you love to hear more about? Is there an area of positive psychology you would love to get some more information on in terms of the research? Give us a shout out at info@theflourishingcenter.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a wonderful, flourishing day.